So let me actually go a little bit further back than 30 years. When we think about drug discovery and development at the beginning of the last century, in a way, there was almost a sledgehammer approach, which is these medicines that were empirical would almost emerge. And well, that's changed in some fields. To be honest, in other fields, it hasn't changed all that much. But what happened about 30, 40 odd years ago that started us down this path of a significant evolution that I think has changed drug discovery and development forever and for the better was the emergence of biotechnology. And when we go all the way back to the beginning, right, we think about the birth of companies like Genentech. Genentech was founded on effectively insulin and other such genes and proteins that were discovered to have an association, such that in a patient who is missing a protein, you could use recombinant technologies to make that protein, restore function, and treat them. And it was tremendously useful in the context of diabetes, where you no longer had to depend on insulin from pigs. It was tremendously useful in restoring, say, blood levels, hematocrit through erythropoietin, et cetera, et cetera. But at the same time that grew from a standing start into a large industry in its own right, it was a almost digital framework that was emergent but linear. And I mean that because you'd find one gene, one protein, and when you had that linearity and that association of disease with what's called causality, which is, as it sounds, the cause, then you could get those effects, but that's not universal. And it was less than I think people were hoping it would be when we went down that framework. Now, there's been a whole set of tools that have taken that to the next level, right? Things like gene therapy, which allows us to potentially use nucleic acids and other such approaches instead of just a protein. Things like protein engineering that allow us to improve upon what the original state might have been and reduce things like the way that the body might reject a protein through the immune system, et cetera. This has been accelerated more recently by technologies like gene editing a la CRISPR. But something interesting happened about 10 years ago. And this has opened up, I think, the beginning of that opened up the beginning of the second stage, if you will, in my mind, of drug discovery and development in the more modern era. And that's what I like to think of as digital integration. Now, in the context of digital integration, there's a small number of companies that have been able to take what I'll call a causal target. That is something that underlies a disease, and we know that that target to be the cause of the disease or the treatment to be highly, highly associated with a highly successful therapeutic, that if you can put engineering systems around it, you can very efficiently go from insight to drug. Now, the reality of that sits right in front of us. If we look at Moderna, they spent the last 10 years standing up a digitally integrated platform, and I believe we're really the first one to do that. Now, going back over just the last 2 years, right, we've all seen this play out in real time and often have conversations around it, of course, around our dinner table. What's fascinating about it was in a matter of weeks, they were able to go from a viral gene target, which in these sorts of cases has a high degree of causality, especially as you think about the association with a vaccine. Their engineering systems allowed them to very quickly make a drug out of it. And what's interesting is over the last less than 2 years, Moderna has put drugs into more patients than the entirety of the biotech industry before it. And that's really where the power of digital integration has made itself into a reality, and a reality that many of us have directly experienced. But we're at a precipice, and that's really because human data allows us for the first time to think of what I like to think of as digital nativity. And it's in that framework of really being digitally native, where that next generation, that next level, that transformative framework actually becomes really powerful and creates the potential tipping point for us to think about yet a new future, and one that I think can bring forth some of the visions that we might see as opportunities for the future of drug discovery and development?